Excellent. So yes, like I said, thank you for joining. That was the Africa Akili Declaration, and we're really excited to share that with you because it is Africa Day, African Liberation Day today on the 25th of May. So we're really excited that you are all joining us because I think it's such an important conversation. I'm South African. I'm part of WEAll. I'm the network co-lead, and my role is very focused on members. I've been joined this week by my colleague Anna from Spain, and we have been in Johannesburg and now we're in Cape Town, and we have been having this conversation around African liberation. What does it mean? Who is it for? And how does this tie into the concept of a well-being economy? Does liberation mean economic systems change is needed? So as I am welcoming you into the room, I would love you to also share your thoughts into the chat before I welcome our speaker. So this is just sharing my screen quickly. Let's see. As it says, what does African liberation mean to you? So if you can just pop that into the chat as we are coming into the room, put into the chat, even if you are obviously not from Africa, what does that word or phrase mean to you? I would love to hear your thoughts, your opinions as you're welcoming people into the room. I'm still letting people in. What does African liberation mean to you? It can be a word, it can be a feeling, it can be a sentence, but we would love to know your thoughts as a global alliance that is joining us today on the 25th of May, African Liberation Day. I think it's really important that we hear your thoughts and your opinions on this as well. But as you know, the true style of WEAll and our WEAll talks is that it is collaborative, and we will have some room and space for discussion at the end of the session. So we are going to have a speaker who I'm going to introduce just now, and they will speak for 20 to 30 minutes. And then straight after that, we would love you to be listening, absorbing, and getting your questions and your engagements, your comments, your thoughts ready so that you can participate in a discussion with her. So for those of you who have joined us for the first time, you're not used to WEAll or WEAll Talks, we are representing the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, which is where we get that word WEAll. And today is a collaboration with the Club of Rome, a really, really solid partner of WEAll. They have been with us since the beginning, the creation of WEAll. So we're really excited that this WEAll talk is with a representative from the Club of Rome, and we'll be speaking into this topic, the fifth element, African youth liberating the future. And if I can introduce our speaker, her name is Miss Nolita Mvunelo. She is actually a chemical engineer by training from South Africa as well. She is a program manager at the Club of Rome, and she's building global initiatives towards regenerative ecosystems, looking at economic, financial innovation, cultural, and intergenerational approaches to systems transformation. She is also the co-lead of the Global Youth Engagement Program by the Club of Rome, which is called the 50%. And previously to joining the Club of Rome, she has been part of leading social enterprise incubators, and she's been part of a variety of educational and tech startups too. So I am going to hand over to our incredible speaker for today, and she will take us through that presentation. And like I said, please do keep your comments and questions towards the end of this presentation. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Thobile. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone. I hope you're all doing well. I'm going to share my screen because I've come prepared with a presentation today, and then we can get this discussion started. I'll start with a brief introduction to the Club of Rome and why a club from Rome is going to be discussing African youth and Africa Day. The Club of Rome is a platform of diverse thought leaders in business, academia, activism, and former politicians who deliberate and look to develop systemic approaches to supporting humanity in its transition from a system of extraction and collapse to a system of global equity in a healthy biosphere. The organization has prioritized 5 key areas of impact, such as the Emerging New Civilizations Initiative, planetary emergency, reframing economics, rethinking finance, youth leadership, and intergenerational dialogues. So in simple terms, when the club is at its best, it is about asking better questions for the sake of humanity, boldly, fiercely, without bias, to address the human problematique. In 1965, the Club of Rome founder Aurelio Pucce noted the various systemic challenges of the 70s, emphasizing the need for a long-term perspective. By 1968, the club was formed, and in 72, they released the Limits to Growth that aimed to highlight the fact that unbridled economic growth is likely to lead to collapse. On the southern tip of Africa, in 1968, a group of South African students, led by Steve Biko and Dr. Mamphela Ramphele, initiated the Black Consciousness movement. They proclaimed that we could liberate ourselves from our mental jails. Under apartheid, they struggled to free the minds of the oppressed as well as their oppressors. 5 years before that, in 1963, the Organization of African Unity was formed to promote unity, support the liberation of African nations from colonial rule, and unite to address common challenges. At the same time, seeds of hope, better yet, seeds of transformation were being planted in different parts of the world. Decades later, the Club of Rome and the Black Consciousness movement embrace an unexpected union through the co-presidency of Dr. Ramphele in the club, with an ever-growing Pan-African membership looking to address the systemic challenges of our continent and, more importantly, reposition Africa as the cradle of civilization that it is and has always been. With all of this groundwork, forward thinking, and revolutionary work happening in the 60s, the state of affairs today has left much to be desired. Despite the groundbreaking success of Limits to Growth, 50 years later, the book has fundamentally failed to inspire the type of action that would have prevented the climate crisis that Africa is facing today. And I say today, not in 2030 and 2050, I say today. Although united under a banner of decolonization and cooperation and socioeconomic development, the African Union is yet to unite towards a transformative model practically and tangibly. The most unfortunate part of all of this is that the youth today across the African continent has had to take on the banner from the Black Consciousness movement to liberate themselves from their liberators. But I'll take a step back to share my reading of the context. Many of you in the room will already know that Africa has the youngest population in the world. 70% of the sub-Saharan population is under 30. That is all in a backdrop of an expected global population growth of about 1.5 billion people by the year 2050. And by far, most of it will be happening in Africa. The future of the world rests within the African continent. And this future is not only by demographics alone. It's not purely because the population will be in this way, but also ecologically, with 60% of uncultivated arable land being on the continent. What will happen in Africa will largely influence what will happen with humanity, or at least in terms of our food security. And hence, there is a significant opportunity to foster a global transformation from this continent. That's the opportunity. And I think many of us are probably well-versed in what the challenges are, from the 60% youth unemployment, the increasing social instability, the political unrest, and all the challenges that have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the growing inequalities. These challenges are complex and have captured the attention of various players in the global, the national, and the regional stages. And this has resulted in discourse, in initiatives and policies that are intended to assist African youth but do not seem to quite produce the systemic change that is required to address the problem. So why are we falling short of systemic transformation? In efforts to help young people develop, we assume minimal agency. And that is why so much work is being done to rescue and enfranchise the disenfranchised, even though the model was never fundamentally built for full participation, not in this continent at least. It was built for systemic dispossession. The way that empowerment efforts are often conceived and executed by international NGOs, the government, and the private sector rarely push beyond the framework of increasing economic participation, even though the efforts are failing to produce the wide-scale transformation required for the scale of the problem. Although this can often go unsaid, I'm going to speak this ugly truth, that when you read in between the lines of all of the economic development work of most of the economic development work that's happening, young unemployed people alive today to be alive tomorrow are often seen as the future of cheap labor in the next frontier of industrialization. The initiatives that I speak of in the previous point rarely yield high earning or meaningful work. So it seems to some extent, despite our best efforts and our deepest desires to solve these challenges, we seem to be a little bit stuck to get out of this framing. So how should we be navigating the developmental, climate, and socioeconomic challenges? So I'm going to put on my Club of Rome hat. As I said earlier, when the club is at its best, it's about asking better questions. The question I'm asking today: what is human development in the context of the 21st century? I'll start with some definitions. Economic and social development is the process in which economic well-being and the quality of life of a nation are improved using different metrics and targets. ESD has often, historically, even before the concept of ESD was formed, been synonymous with terms like modernization, industrialization, and since the 60s has been synonymous with poverty reduction. And that was probably an unnecessary explainer because I am talking to the well-being economy people. So please bear with me though. I'll go into the definition of human development. Human development, defined by the UNDP, is about enlarging the space of possibilities for people, allowing people to have more choice and more options. ESD and human development have, for the most part, been understood and executed as one and the same. Meaning, for the most part, at least in my analysis, when we speak of economic development, we tend to also interchangeably assume human development. But with that in mind, from looking at the Human Development Index of different countries, we now also know that much of the development in places across Europe, and as you can see in the map in the Middle East, etc., that are celebrated in many parts of Africa as the goal, are actually fundamentally impossible to replicate globally. So what does that mean about the future of African youth? African youth need to liberate themselves from this false understanding that by following the model of super consumers, we will create a better future for us and our children. Human development in the 21st century is about resetting, rebuilding, and reinventing societies to prioritize social equality, well-being, and a healthy biosphere. That is the generational task to liberate the future. And if Africa succeeds in this, the cradle of civilization will once again shape civilizations. But before going into proposals and examples of next steps or examples that the Club of Rome has seen that are the seeds of this type of transformation, we need to appreciate the interconnectedness and complexity of this problem. It is not an easy problem to solve, but complexity is not always a problem when it is embraced in its capacity to yield an outsized result. Complexity and a living system means that You don't need everything all at once to create the transformation, but you need seeds of transformation to create something completely new and unexpected. Opening a space of possibilities is not only about economic participation, it is about embracing and reconnecting values with value, ecological and cultural vitality with prosperity. We can catalyze systems change by creating an enabling environment for African youth self-organization and self-actualization. This must be combined with building mechanisms to collaborate with local institutions to strengthen the impact of the self-led work, community level, local level work. Allowing for self-designed models of development from the bottom up, both personally and collectively. That is how we can create something new that we haven't seen before, by allowing as many people as possible to participate in the work of creating a future for themselves. By asking critical questions, an environment can be created to raise awareness and the realization of this opportunity among African youth and various actors. And it could lead to the mobilization of youth to develop an understanding of self that is outside of the domestic and the global narratives of who they are, not they, me, I'm youth, who we are, and who we should become. Developing the pathways for these ideas to permeate into broader society by transitioning out of the dominant mechanisms that shape and inhibit their lives. A youth-led self-liberation movement is not new to the continent. As I said earlier, the Black consciousness movement, like it was then, like I said earlier, we had the Black consciousness movement. And like it was then, these movements often struggle to permeate in the mainstream. We have now at our disposal, however, a wide range of tools to address the challenges. We have different individuals and experiments that are being created all across the world and all across the continent. And some of these are being developed by the Club of Rome itself. So I will now share some examples of initiatives that are planting these types of seeds for transformation. When we entered into this core, you were introduced into the Africa Kili Declaration. The declaration was launched by the African members of the Club of Rome with African members of WEAll. And the declaration seeks to encourage all Africans to embrace an African sense, embracing the diversity and youthfulness of the continent, respecting all knowledge systems, seeing that as a strength and not competition, bringing together the values and value of community, sustainability, and circularity to best serve humanity and our environment. The next example is in governance, reimagining governance models by Reimagine South Africa, piloting an inclusive developmental model in the Northwest Platinum Belt, bringing together multiple layers of stakeholders in the Marikana Renewal Program to create a positive legacy after the massacre of 44 miners in 2012 by the South African police. The 50%, as Tobile mentioned at the start of this call that I am co-leading it, is a youth-led global platform that is aimed at upskilling, engaging, and liberating ourselves to rise to the challenges of our generation. What we found through years of youth engagement initiatives is that some of the biggest challenge that is facing youth is a lack of hope and a lack of a belief in ourselves that we have the capacity to create something new. So the 50% then mobilizes an extensive network of youth that are innovating in the spheres of climate resilience, in advocacy, in innovation, and creating a platform for intergenerational collaboration in these initiatives. Taranet is a layer 1 blockchain infrastructure specifically designed to solve real-world problems at scale. Their vision is for a world of access where finance and technology serves communities so that they can fulfill their aspirations for a better life, enabling the self-organization, of community-driven economies with the infrastructure, frameworks, and toolkits to leapfrog and create their own path for development. And lastly, the Leap Maths and Science schools are creating an ecosystem for youth and teachers to redefine themselves beyond their circumstances as they develop 21st century skills. LEAP Maths and Science schools are established across, there are 6 schools established across South Africa in townships in South Africa. It was established in 1990. Right, they're celebrating a pass rate of 95% that exceeds the national statistic, of 75%. Their student retention is at 94%, exceeding the national retention of 50%, and 85% of LEAP graduates have qualified for higher education. So what have we learned when partnering with all of these initiatives? That this is an experimental process and it is deeply contextual. So it's not without its challenges. The learnings are weaved between deeply embedded initiatives that permeating the national institution frameworks to expand the reach of consciousness-based activities is not a trivial task, but it is a task that needs to be done for the reasons as explained earlier. And also allowing the space for emergence for new frameworks to develop is fundamentally not compatible with the current institutional funding frameworks and funding models. This process is typically non-linear, and with the best outcomes being anecdotal or non-measurable. And so how do you measure self-liberation? Or better yet, how do you write self-liberation into a project proposal with measurable outcomes? Those are the challenges, but these are challenges that are worth exploring rather than continuing to commit to something that we fundamentally know at the back of our minds that it is not quite going to work the way we hoped it would. So with that said, I invite all of you to be part of the exploration. The 5th element is the Club of Rome initiative that explores this type of work, that explores these threads, that explores the pathways for African youth to liberate their future by inviting and sensing, which means to convene and engage youth organizations and communities to create and develop relationships and networks in different areas, nurture an ecosystem of partners and collaborators looking from a diversity of perspectives. Then we look to explore and discover, which is to inquire and reveal relevant findings in response to some of the critical questions that are addressed in the invite and sense phase, to explore the potential for self-definition and self-organization, to gather contributions for further understanding and identify pathways towards transformation. And the 3rd is to then partner and share. So to foster collaboration and co-develop strategies for change, to develop a series of recommendations and focus areas directed at both youth and civil society and all actors in the system overall, to disseminate these findings to decision makers and the public alike, with the intention to then spread the understanding of the value of this self-liberative work. And so I will end this presentation with a quote that the world changes according to the way that people see it. And if we can alter, even by a millimeter, the way that people look at reality, then you can change the world. So I hope that our discussion today will, even by half a millimeter, open the space for possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you. That was so good. I have to put clapping hands. Thank you. Really insightful and so much to chew on, so many different initiatives that you are involved with. So really, thank you. I really appreciate that. And I see, yay, other clapping hands and hearts from our audience. I'm glad you enjoyed that too. So this is our chance now to really engage and get to know more and understand anything that you might have missed, or share comments or your thoughts or how you can get involved. So please feel free to raise your hand using the button, if possible, which is at the bottom of the screen, the little button that says reactions, and then there's a raise hand feature. And yeah, we'd love to hear your questions, your comments, your thoughts, so that Nolita can engage with you further. Any questions? Comments? How did it land with you? I see we have LC to begin with. Let's start. Don't be shy.
Thank
Feel
you so
free to
much.
go.
Thank you so much. I'm so inspired and encouraged at the place where you're starting this transformation, which is with a sense of self and identity. And there's so much for everyone to learn about the big transformation we're all facing. But you've made a case very clearly about the importance of the African people in the big change for the rest of the world. My question is, and I don't know if this is an answerable question, but maybe it's a beautiful question, I hope. Beautiful questions create beautiful minds, they say. Have you thought about hooking this into another existing change program? One that actually does have metrics attached to it, so that I'm just thinking maybe there's a way to demonstrate that what you're proposing here, when it is the foundation of a more conventional initiative, can accelerate the impact of that initiative. That's one thing. And the other is to root it in something that's already funded and has momentum. Open questions.
Thank you. Really love that. I love how you said beautiful questions, because this is, I think Nolita always speaks to this, is the whole point of this fifth element is about asking better questions. So I'll hand it over to Nolita to respond.
On hooking it to an existing project, I think that it's a double-edged sword, because when you're looking to create the space for emergence and a partner that is too established and is very clear on their deliverables and their metrics, then you find that the space for something completely unexpected, the space to experiment, becomes restricted or restrictive, intentionally or unintentionally. Sometimes it's not vocally said, but it happens subconsciously through the design of said project itself, because you're then looking to find spaces to be complementary rather than spaces for something new to happen. What we have done, though, as you can see, there are many threads happening all at once. Some of them are funded and getting their own momentum. And those are then creating the learnings or creating the space for experimentation for something that is perhaps less funded or does not have as much information, etc. But also maybe something I should have emphasized more, when the examples, a lot of the examples that I listed, especially the ones that are not Club of Rome examples, are initiatives that have been in progress for years, and some of them decades. So these are initiatives that have a proven track record of success. And not only a track record of success, these are the fifth element initiative by design looks at partnering with initiatives that have worked in situations where most would call hopeless, because then, and have created success, because that is what transformation looks like, is looking at a situation where other people have given up and creating something new, and that having its levels of success. So learning with those people and collaborating with those people is where we're then finding the momentum to say, oh, okay, here's a new learning of what it means to work with African youth. Because speaking to John Gilmore from LEAP, who's done this for almost 30 years now, this is what it means when you're talking about self-liberation with a child from a township in Cape Town. Or another partner we work with a lot that I didn't mention is the Tamkeen Foundation of Human Development in Tangiers in Morocco. And the examples that she has of what it means to work in human development with young people in an environment that, everyone, including the government, had said the situation is kind of a little bit hopeless. I hope that answer was adequate. Yeah.
Thank you. I really, really love that. And I think one of the comments that we had last night at our African Liberation Dinner was, if you're feeling pessimistic, if you're feeling unhopeful, speak to African youth, because they are filled with ideas, innovation, just a bubbling sense of like wanting to be active citizens. So I was really, I mean, it's a tough time, especially in South Africa. We have elections next year and there's a myriad of challenges, but I was really moved by that yesterday. Someone from the African Climate Alliance said, if you're feeling pessimistic, speak to African youth, because as much as they are going through such difficult challenges, they are still so full of hope and excitement and ideas. And these are the people that we need to be listening to in order to think of economic systems change. So Anna has her hand up, and I know she's going to chat a little bit about that as well.
Well, first, Nolita, thank you so much for for everything that you have shared with us. As you know, I am sitting right in front of Tobile. I'm in Cape Town with her. I was hoping that I was going to have the opportunity to meet you in person. It was not possible, but what I want to pass on to you is that these two events that we have hosted in Johannesburg and in Cape Town, it has given me so much insights and understanding and really deep conversations with the people that we have met. And one of the things that for me I highlighted was that message that Tobile was referring about. Youth has the answers and they have so much to share with everybody. And another thing that it got really, I was very impressed as well, is the need for connections, for having more opportunities of those spaces. Everybody was like, oh, we need to have these spaces more often. We need more spaces where we can talk, where we can connect, where we can collaborate. So I wanted to pass that message to you as well, Nolita, because I know that you couldn't make it. But Tobile and I, we're going to be working on how we're going to be continuing these conversations, these possibilities for people to work together. And obviously, we want to count on you and the Fifth Element and everything that you are involved with. And so it's been an incredible week that I've been here, and I wanted you to be aware of it. That's all.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry that I couldn't be there. It was such a last minute change. But yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I would tend to agree. I'm biased. I am an African youth. So if people are like, oh, you are the future, I'm like, yes, thanks. But at the same time, I think that it needs to be an intergenerational approach. Because to say that the youth have the answer, also I think sometimes puts a little bit too much responsibility in young people. We do have a right to a childhood too. So I think it is about having an intergenerational conversation, and more than an intergenerational conversation, an intergenerational collaboration on initiatives. There's much to be learned on both sides. And, we do say learning sometimes, like often happens by doing, and learning is a change in behavior and a changing understanding that creates a change in behavior. And the behaviors that need to be changed aren't only of young people, they are the behaviors of everyone. So how do we create spaces for conversations for everyone to be talking to one another, with the understanding that we're doing this to pay forward to those who are younger today, but also to pay forward to those who are going to be alive later. Yeah.
I love that. And I think to add, I mean, Nolita's been in discussions, Nella have been in discussions, because WEAll Youth has been through this transition where it became its own entity and it was own movement and its own language. And what we were finding as WEAll was that we were losing that intergenerational ability. And so the aim now is to re-strategize and bring the youth back into all of our WEAll spaces. So that's really, really important for us. And something that I think, just to add to this theme of African liberation, one of the things that's so important is to remember a lot of our stories and our culture and our traditions. And it's so important for us to hear from our elders and have these opportunities to gather in a circle and listen and ask questions of what it used to look like and what it used to feel like and how they did this. And I really, just think it's so important, because we are losing our cultures and traditions. And we were saying that it's so important. I loved what you said, Nolita, around this being the cradle of humanity. And I took Anna to the cradle of humankind this week, and she was just in awe. And to think that humanity comes from this region and East Africa is so beautiful. And how can we continue to shape humanity going forward? I just loved that quote, and I'm gonna tweet it after this as well. So thank you so much for bringing that perspective as well, Nolita. Simon has his hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Tobile, and thanks, Nolita, for bringing this to the front row, as Anna puts it. I think it's about time we have this perspective in our conversations with WEAll, and it's really important. And thanks also for mentioning the intergenerational. The need for an intergenerational connection. I sometimes feel very frustrated as my generation that we failed. We failed in many ways to stop this decline of this environmental collapse and overshoot and the ability to address inequalities. So I'm happy, not that I'm offering ancestral wisdom, but I'm happy to feel part of that. Included in that intergenerational connection. But actually, I wanted to go back to the idea of youth that you mentioned, Nolita, and also Tobile, because in many ways Africa is like the youngest continent, right? It's the youngest continent in terms of its independence from colonial past, but also in terms of its demographics. With such a large percentage of the population, below the age of 30, and in that way, it's such a key continent in terms of the shaping of the future, not only of Africa, but of the way the world's going to go. And I lived all my life in Latin America, and I've seen the pathway to development that Latin America has chosen, which is very extractive, very destructive of the environment, and very urbanized. So, will that future go down the pathway of Latin America or Asia in that sort of very extractive logic? And I think working with the youth is going to be really important. In terms of being able to shape a different future. So the kind of question I had, what I was interested in hearing your reflections, Nolita, is how do we actually help build this movement of the youth that enables the youth of Africa to be able to shape that future? I mean, that seems to me the key question. And I asked that genuinely from my role with WEAll as movements lead. And I think we struggle with that, but it seems to me that that's so strategic in terms of shaping the future, not just for Africa, but for the world.
Okay, thank you, Simon. On the first point, when you were saying you feel like your generation has failed, well, that always fascinates me when people say that, because like you're still very much alive, Simon, so you haven't failed if you haven't stopped. Like you probably have like a lot of time on your hands, lifespan wise at least, to get something going. And I mean, WEAll is part of that, looking at the pathways towards more well-being, being embedded in the economy. That's important imaginative work that needs to happen, because what's fundamental about how we imagine development to look like, and the reason why human development and economic and social development to us just sound synonymous or are treated synonymously, is because of the fact that it's really hard to de-link the two. And also it's very dangerous to also just say we have to de-link the two, because to someone who is living in an environment of like a low material reality environment, when you say de-link economics from human development, it does sound a lot like saying you need to be happier with being poor. So there's a lot of work about really fundamentally trying to understand what this future could look like, that apparently no one else has been able to do that. It's difficult work to want to engage in. I also in myself sometimes have a moment of like, okay, but what would it look like? What would this future look like that is not just economic growth for the sake of economic growth? What would it look like? Because we know that it fundamentally is, it is impossible in terms of like material flows and access to resources, et cetera, et cetera. So what is going to be left behind for us to build our future on, et cetera, et cetera. But I will leave that topic aside. On your question about movements and supporting a youth movement, the first one is relationships are fundamental. Relationships are the number one way in which human beings understand values and relationality. And so fostering and building relationships between organizations, between individuals, is the first way to ensure the livelihood of a movement. Because when you know a friend of a friend of a friend who's also interested in this, that is how movements continue to survive. That is how movements are shared. When I speak to Dr. Rampele about, the Black consciousness movement and how it developed and how it grew, it really was to how it went from being formed in 1968 to what happened in 1976 with the youth uprising in South Africa. It really was about the relationships and young people speaking to each other in different contexts, not very organized, but somehow 10 years later, it created this eruption that had the whole country stopping dead in its tracks because the young people were protesting in the streets. So relationships are a living example of relational well-being, and that's the first part. The second one is the intergenerational dialogues and collaboration, because you cannot do this type of work with only half the population participating in it. So where is creating more spaces to share the knowledge, creating more spaces to share, and the knowledge is being shared in both directions. It's not only about a more mature person sharing their insights, but also a younger person sharing their interpretation of what this knowledge means to them in their context, because that's when the learning becomes growing, becomes something new, and becomes a different action. And then the third one is, when it comes to the work of engaging young people, it is important that the learning is contextualized, but then also they have an opportunity to then enact the new things that they have learned, to actively participate in the new learnings that they have been exposed to, meaningfully and actively participate in that. And then again, to go back to the context of working with young people who are living in a situation where they do not have access to resources. You cannot speak only of consciousness if you do not want to meet the material challenges of the people you're working with. That is something sometimes that I notice, where someone will say, I'm here to speak about spiritual well-being of the youth. And it's like, okay, but ma'am, these people the people you're speaking to, they do not have access to food. So you also need to address that fundamental problem also. Otherwise, you are trying to do the work of consciousness with someone in an empty stomach. And it is, but I will also share a learning that I have from John, a club of Roma, John Gilmore, where he says, however, self-actualization is not prohibited by not having access to resources. Human beings self-actualize by being in relationship with one another. So that is also an additional element to it. A very long answer, but I hope those three elements are enough to know where to get started in supporting a youth movement or facilitating any type of youth participation.
Thanks, Nolita. I'm, if I may, also wondering whether you see the connections across the majority world, also, with youth in Latin America, for example, who are also challenged by, and still also a young continent, by the way, but challenged by this idea of development and looking at post-growth, almost post-development narratives that are emerging as well. I think that there could be some powerful connections that could be made there.
Thank you. Yeah, we through the 50%, our network is incredibly global, and a huge part of that community is Latin American, so much so that we do a quarterly magazine. And the issue from last quarter was voices from Latin America that are speaking specifically to the things you're mentioning. So I will share the link on the chat to the magazine itself to have a look at what the youth from Latin America is saying, or at least the youth from Latin America that I know are saying.
Oh, I'd love to see that. Thank you. Please do share the link. And I think you have kind of touched on this and going into Simon's point, but I just wanted to ask, since I don't see any other hands, but please feel free, you still have 9 minutes if you do have a question or a comment. But in the meantime, I'll squeeze into the gap and ask around your thoughts on allyship, because it's a topic that we've been hearing over and over again. What would allyship mean to an audience like ours that is, you know, there's a diverse audience here, but majority are not from Africa. We are from various parts of the world, but specifically minority world. How does this audience that is with us on this call today become an ally to Africans and to African youth specifically, and maybe to the work that you're doing? How can they engage in the fifth element?
Okay, I'm gonna have a meta answer and then I'll have like a practical one. On on the meta level. So when I spoke earlier on why we struggle with systemic transformation, and I spoke about agency, and I spoke about dispossession, that is the thing that I've seen to be the challenge the most. And when I speak about dispossession, it's rarely a conscious thing. It is really a conscious thing where someone is saying, I am now taking power and agency from you. But it does happen in how we design the work that we do, in the proposals that we write, etc. It is a fundamental part of, and I say we because I am working in an international NGO, so I understand the process of writing a proposal to get it funded so that you can support an XYZ project, etc., is that because of the fact that going into the process of trying to mobilize resources for said initiative, you will write outcomes, etc. You predefine how the community is going to behave, or you predefine what the community is supposed to receive, you predefine, etc. And in its essence, it creates it reduces the effectiveness of whatever it is that's supposed to be happening, because then there's very little room for the community to then come back and say, this is what I need to do. And I mean, there are a lot of then community developed models that are happening. I've seen this also in research, that's now we're having a lot of community-based research that is happening, but then the type of engagement that is happening then is very much, I will take knowledge from you, and then I will get this funding, and then maybe like you will get this money with these conditions, and this is what's going to happen. So how do we build trusting relationships? How do we fundamentally embed trust, but more than trust, respect? Because that's how it is interpreted when you come to a community with this, is that at the end, it feels like there is a fundamental lack of respect a little bit, you know, where it's just like, I know you have good intentions, you're trying your best, but it kind of still feels a little bit disrespectful, you know? And so when we're speaking of allyship, there is I think mobilizing, and maybe more than mobilizing, but working towards questioning the way in which this process happens, fighting against the way in which this process happens, probably is one of the best ways, is probably one of the best ways to start this this conversational allyship, I guess, is the word, Tobile, that you used. And then in terms of getting involved in the fifth element itself, we are part of the fifth element, the broader umbrella of the fifth element, looking at what is the role of organizations such as philanthropy when it comes to systemic change? And what does it mean for a funder to be more than what the current role of a funder is, but to be more of a collaborator and more involved in the process of the systems transformation? What does that collaboration look like? And there's a lot of initiatives that look like this that are in development. So please go have a look at the website. And if any of it interests you, there is like a call to action form there, or maybe to really can like share my email for anyone who's like really interested to say, I'd actually, this is what I'm doing and I'd like to know more about this, and would be very interested in having that conversation. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, you are just amazing. I wanted to just ask Push, I saw a comment from you. I don't know if you're wanting to speak to that, because there's an interesting, but I don't know if I understood it 100%. And then Jan, in this comment in the chat, he says, do African countries liberate from pesticides in agriculture? Is organic farming growing? You want to answer that or share your thoughts?
Hello. Hi.
Oh, hi. Sorry, you're gonna share before Nolita said. Okay, perfect. Go ahead.
I'm Push Pranath. People call me Push. I'm still kind of struggling with this whole thing, right? Movement. And what has kind of, if you look at the anti-apartheid struggle, and I was honored to work at that time in between 87 and 96 in Southern Africa. So for me, it's my sacred land as well, my sacred geography. So I went back, just a couple of years ago, and again last year. And I entirely agree. I mean, the youthfulness of Africa is so attractive. It's magnificent. And but again, as you said, the existential issue is so strong. I mean, if your stomach is empty, that's it, So, and also because of the youthfulness, the past is become almost irrelevant. The present is so compelling, visually, everything, the technological thing. So the youth actually really drive, and they want instant recognition, obviously instant reward. So this slow way of building up movement, I start to think, you look at the occupying movement, everything, if you look at in the last 10 years, shelf life is very short. So perhaps we need to do it differently. And perhaps we may park the movement. Maybe we'll pick up some of the wisdom you talked about, some of it. But I think we need to look at it. What are the short-term way of doing? Because I'm a student of change. I keep looking. And for me, why I go back to Africa is I've gained so much from Africa, just like everyone from outside. And it's a last chance to give back something to Africa for all the wonders it has given me and to everybody else in the world, and continue to do so. So how do we then actually use this energy of young people when I was in Zambia? And that's what troubled me, because because they are compelled by what's happening, by the visualization, by the recognition and reward that are so instant and so cosmically small, but important. So I'm thinking, no, this business of building a movement, I think it is not going to work in the way we are thinking. We have to think differently. That's why I put earlier, maybe we should start, because children grow. The ones who were born when I was working, there is more 30 now. And they have no idea what happened even in South Africa. At the time of the World Cup, I was with young people working on health issue during that time. And all the young people are supporting America. And it struck me, it really hit me hard. So this is why I'm saying that we have to find a different way. And Nolita, I really, really like the way you put things together and the way you explain. It really touched me immediately. So we got to rework in such a way that actually takes the best of this technological and communication and instant answer world and use that, put it back. I think that I'm sorry, I'm a bit scattered about this, but I'm speaking both from my mind and heart. So this is the way it's
we
going,
feel it.
And it is situational. And again, I think this whole Pan-Africanism also, I love it. But again, there is a danger with that. So let us contextualize. Context is everything. This is at least my thinking, and you can straight away tell me that is completely irrelevant to us. I will accept it. Contextualize, identify where things are happening, and help it to anchor and root there, and let it take its own time frame, and let it define itself. And slowly we may hopefully be somehow able to knit this wonderful, whatever, carpet of things, which is so
Thank
colorful.
you.
But so that is my thought. I'm sorry for taking such a long
No,
time.
that's
Forgive me.
fine. It's just because it's now at the hour. So I would love Nolita to share her thoughts on what you've just shared, Push, and the comment in the chat, and then I will bring it to a close. So Nolita, over to you for your last thoughts and comments based on what was shared now.
Okay, I will try to keep it short. On the question in the chat on pesticides and agriculture, not very well versed in agriculture, but like I said in the presentation, with 60% of uncultivated arable land, we need to reposition ourselves as people who have the ability to make a decision about what should be acceptable and unacceptable. And I think we haven't quite yet realized that this is the position we're in, that we are in the telling position, not an accepting whatever's being given to us position. But it's complex because we have, the industry in and of itself is complex, the relationship between the large scale farmers and the small scale farmers, etc. And I don't have enough of a depth of understanding in the subject to give you a more consolidated answer. So I will kind of leave it there. And on the point of movements, I will say this. I have unknowingly been engaged in this movement for about 8 years now. And I say unknowingly in the sense that my conceptualization of what a movement is not necessarily having people under this one banner of the Africa Kili Declaration or my fundamental understanding of what should be happening, but I am someone who has been incredibly committed to facilitating as much as possible the capacity of my peers to execute the creative and innovative solutions that they have and their visions for the future. And what I've seen is my peers have committed and they've done quite a lot of amazing and successful work in creating a lot of new and exciting and different things that are giving us a different understanding and a different way of doing certain things in South Africa, in Africa as a continent, etc., etc. Innovations are happening. Discourse has changed. Movements are being built. And when I say movements, I mean political movements, as I'm using that term. Young people are fundamentally questioning what is happening to them, and they're not accepting the things that are going on and happening to them. And this has been the case since, because 8 years ago, I was 17. This has been the case since I was 17 years old. This is what I've seen. This is what I have experienced. So I think that, yes, there is the danger of instant gratification. And this is kind of also what is innate to to having worked with someone who's 18 years old, transitioning into being an adult, is that you are looking to build a life. And so some paths are easier than others, and some will choose easier paths, etc., etc. But from what I've seen, the commitment is strong and people are betting their lives, they're betting their time, they're betting their energy into getting this done. I am right now sitting in Bangkok at a locally led adaptation conference where we're looking at all of the innovation and resilience work that's being done by young people across the globe to be climate resilient. That's the conversation that's happening almost every other session in this conference, because it wasn't a youth conference, but almost every other session in this conference is young people are doing so much and we're falling behind. How do we support them better? So that's my message of hope, in that I think, like in the 60s when everything was happening and it was just like, everything is so fast, what is going on? I have a feeling we're living in one of those moments. So it is probably faster than it was before because of the technology that's available. But it's freaking great. It's freaking exciting. I will say that one. So yeah.
Thank you. You make us excited. And I see Simon has the last word. quickly before I wrap up? Go ahead, Simon. You muted.
Sorry, I was meaning to applaud, not put my
Oh,
hand
not
up.
a hand up.
It was an
Woohoo!
applause.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Big applause. We are so grateful and so honored to have you. I think, I don't know, I always think you just have the ability to articulate like such complex things in such a really like profound way, and a way that I can follow your train of thought. Don't know if it's the engineering brain, but I am so moved by your wisdom and by your way of articulation. I'm really grateful for you and so thankful. I know you've been sick and you've been traveling, and so we are just so grateful to have your time and your, the sharing of knowledge on this platform. Please do contact Nolita. There is her email address if you want to get in touch. And then I just want to quickly do a shout out for our next WEAll talk, which is happening on the 28th of June. It is with Andrew Thornton. He is working with businesses. It's all around putting the heart back into business and to see why businesses are not able to deliver on their purpose. So he speaks about the key habits needed in order to be able to deliver on the values and the purposes of business. So thank you to everybody. We really appreciate you. And please do email Nolita if you've got any questions, or myself, and do look out for the recording and share with your networks. We really need this African knowledge to be shared more broadly. And happy Africa Liberation Day to you all. Bye. Thank you once again.